Welcome to r/Tales from Tech Support, where we get to have a little chuckle at the technologically disadvantaged, like me. I'm Uncle Reddit, and have I got a story for you. Well, I really appreciate you guys stopping by for today's stories. Just got done working on my porch remodel for a couple hours, and then I figured it was about time to come up here and read some tech support stories. Check the hardware. Some years ago, I needed a particular sort of sensor for my biology research. It was neither high precision nor particularly complex, but it was strange. No one sold anything like it. So I designed and built the sensors I needed on a minimal budget, on a scratched up table at home, using a soldering iron half my own age. And then, through a series of improbable events, this sensor got a lot of attention. It made the college I work at look good, and to this day, if you search for my real name, what you'll probably find is the college's press release about how my device will solve world hunger and cure AIDS while you sleep. As an indication that even the college didn't believe this, they rewarded me with a $15 gift certificate at the local coffee shop. However, the computer science department did notice that I had just done something that looked very much like Internet of Things, and made me an offer. Instead of building my next device on a table at home using a soldering iron from the late Paleolithic, I could use their very nice lab with lots of equipment, and even raid their parts bins, as long as I also passed off some of my knowledge to their students. And so I ended up spending a lot of time in the computer science lab. This story comes from that time. Some details of actual projects have been fuzzed because specific projects would de-anonymize me quite easily. On the day this story begins, I'm in lab, laying out a circuit. As I'm doing so, I'm chatting with the students, a small group of who I have come to know fairly well, who spend most of their free time in the lab tinkering with things. One student, who I'll dub Hamilcar, who doesn't like the Second Punic War, calls me over for troubleshooting. And for my education, and some of you who don't know, Hamilcar was a Carthaginian general and statesman, leader of the Barcid family, and father of Hannibal, Hasdrubal, and Mago. And I know I mangled every single one of those. He was also father-in-law to Hasdrubal the Fair. Hamilcar commanded the Carthaginian land forces in Sicily from 247 BC to 241 BC during the latter stages of the First Punic War. Learn something new every day. I get up from my chair, careful to bring my cup of coffee with me. When troubleshooting with a student, a cup of coffee is essential, because you can raise it to your face and take a sip from it to hide the fact that while your voice is saying, "That happens sometimes," your face is saying, "I don't think you fully recovered from that brain injury." Hamilcar's project involves a speaker. He's quite early on in working on it, and only has the speaker attached to an audio control board / amplifier, which is, in turn, attached to an Arduino or Arduino. I'm going to say Arduino. I don't know. Arduinos are programmable microcontrollers. Hamilcar points to his screen where a small program is open in an IDE. Pointing, he says, "This should play a small tune through here," but nothing's happening. "When did it break?" I ask. "It never worked," he responds. This seems strange. I question him a bit more, as I think we all know the right way to build this device would be 1. Wire up the speaker, run current through and make sure you hear something. 2. Write a tiny piece of code that just makes some sort of noise. Verify that you can get the code on the Arduino and get noise out of the speaker. 3. Turn make noise into make these specific noises. What Hamilcar has done is wire everything together, write a giant block of code, and then test it. Have you checked the hardware, I ask? Always start troubleshooting at step 0. I then have to explain that I mean, have you done anything to verify that the hardware works? It's wired correctly, Hamilcar says. This is not what I asked. Have you ever gotten any sound out of that speaker, I ask? A blip when you plugged it in? A short code snippet that just makes it hum? Anything to test it? No, Hamilcar exclaims, clearly unreasonably annoyed by these questions. Other students look up from their projects and stare at him in surprise. It's plugged in correctly. I'm not an idiot. I bring my coffee cup up to my face and take a long sip. But did you test it? No, Hamilcar yells. I understand a bit where his frustration is coming from. He does have some real skills from his own, independent study, and nothing he's done yet has been able to showcase this. He feels like we don't believe that he knows things. On the other hand, he's being an ass. I bring the coffee cup down and give Hamilcar the look. If you ever find yourself teaching teenagers or young adults, make sure to practice the look. done correctly, the victim should feel the chill of coming winter creeping into their bones and hear the distant howl of the first wolves picking up their trail. This is, I say, gesturing expansively with my coffee mug while continuing to glare, computer science. We test things. Check your hardware. I then remind him that the day before I had wasted time debugging a bad solder joint. Hamilcar makes his saving throw against the look. I know how to solder. I point out that the years of his life are but a blink of my eye, and that while I had learned to solder as the great ice sheets retreated at the end of the younger Dryas, he had learned to solder 2 weeks earlier, from me, and that his solder joints still closely resembled metal potatoes. You're not helping. No, I finally agreed, I'm not, and I won't until you check your hardware. Then I walked back to my bench, and thus began the descent into madness. Day 1. Hamilcar has discovered that Arduinos are not very good at keeping time by themselves. He has a theory that this is somehow messing up the speaker. Perhaps the sound frequencies are being compressed into the ultrasonic or something. He's fiddling around with clock chips, which are really only needed when your time intervals are hours or days. Obviously, this just further complicates his untested circuit and doesn't help. Day 2. Hamilcar spends an hour undoing his clock chip changes from yesterday. He's now convinced that he's running the Arduino at the wrong internal clock speed. This can happen to the chip brain of the Arduino, but only if you buy that chip yourself and wire it up. Inside an Arduino, that won't happen. I gotta look this up. Well, according to Google, it's pronounced Arduino. I'll try it. Day 3. Hamilcar is now propounding a new theory to the other students. Arduinos use a C-derived coding language. But what if this language doesn't handle global and local variables in the same way? Much like the Carthaginian invasion of Italy, this theory serves only to cause a lot of destruction and get people angry without actually making any progress towards winning the war. Day 4. Hamilcar is bouncing his latest idea off another student. At this point, Hamilcar's broken circuit and his refusal to test the hardware have become a running joke. Before he gets past the first sentence of his new theory, the other student asks, "Have you checked the hardware?" Hamilcar explodes in anger. The other students just shake their heads, and I eventually have to tell him to use his inside voice. Day 5. Hamilcar is hunched over a station, muttering something in an unknown language. Is this a dark ritual to the old gods of blood and fire, meant to strike me down for questioning his soldering skills? Has he completely snapped and is speaking in a new language that makes sense only to him? I listen more closely. Nope, he's just swearing continuously under his breath. Day 6 is a Saturday. As a biologist, I sometimes have to come in to work on a weekend to keep my living study subjects, well, living. I had also glued some pieces together on a device on Friday, so I swing by the computer science lab to see if they set up correctly, and if so, to glue the next set. The lab is quiet, empty of students. As much as I like joking around with the students, it's relaxing to be alone and able to focus. I finished my own project and decide to check Hamilcar's project. If I can debug it, I'll steer him correctly on Monday. There's no multimeter on Hamilcar's station, of course, but once I grab one, his power and ground check out. The Arduino is pinned out correctly, and I'm getting power where I should there too. The audio controller and amplifier is a bit of a mystery. I haven't used this design before. I unlock the computer and find that Hamilcar already has the wiring diagram open. Power is solid. Ground is ground. LVL is not attached to anything. What the hell is an LVL anyway? I know that the chip can do much more complicated things than what Hamilcar is doing with it, so maybe it's not needed? But debugging means figuring out what things are. I find a webpage where someone is using LVL on this chip in their own circuit. I look at what they seem to be doing with it. It's not amazingly helpful. I bend over to poke at the chip with a multimeter just to see if I can tell if LVL is output or input. As my head gets close to the chip, I hear a faint sound in the quiet of the room. I pick up the speaker and put it up to my ear. It's playing a tune. Right. LVL, as in sound level. 30 seconds later, I've decoded the wiring diagram and have LVL attached to 5-volt power. The speaker is humming out a tune clear as day. I leave a text file open on the computer. Checked your hardware. Amplifier on chip was not powered. 2 months later, we're sitting in the lab. A new student loudly complains to no one in particular that his starter exercise, get an LED to blink, isn't working. Did your LED power on solidly when you first plugged it in, I ask? No, the new student says. Does that matter? A wave of apocalyptic fury breaks over us, a roar of sound and anger. It's Hamilcar. Check your damn hardware! Well, it looks like Hamilcar finally learned his lesson. I mean, look, I can understand being hard-headed and thinking that you're right. I've done it tons of times myself. But even when I think I'm right, I'm not just going to not check the things that somebody more experienced is suggesting. I might be ticked off and cussing while I do it, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to check it just to either prove them wrong or fix the issue. It's not that hard. He could have been done doing that within an hour. That's what happens when you let pride get in the way sometimes. Can you rebuild our company? Several years ago, I worked as a software developer for a company that provided network and desktop support for our customers. This story is about a new customer we got that was an e-commerce business. They hired us to fix some of their servers, but the problem was much, much deeper than that. It seems that the company had, over a period of several years, gradually let go each and every person in their IT department. The last IT employee had provided a couple of Word documents containing some server IPs and admin credentials, and then they let him go. This seemed to be part of a larger pattern, as the company was housed in a large business complex, which they used to fully occupy. However, half the building was now unoccupied, a significant portion of the building was sublet to other companies, and the current staff was maybe half a dozen people. This company had over a dozen servers, but no network diagram, and no one there who even understood what most of the servers did. Our techs did their best to sort it out based on the documentation from the former IT, and managed to restore the server that failed. That server failing was what prompted the company to reach out to us. A couple weeks later, I was called in to meet with the person running the company. The actual owners were completely removed from the company's operations. It was simply a cash cow that they had zero involvement with. It seemed that separate from the initial failed server, their e-commerce site was now broken. Keep in mind, this e-commerce site is literally the entire product of the company. They wanted me to fix the site. However, they didn't have any documentation for the site. They didn't have anyone on staff who understood the code base. They didn't have credentials to the source control. They didn't even know which service the application was hosted on. Apparently, they had outsourced 100% of the development of the application to Russian programmers. We're in the US, nearly a decade ago. The programmers built the app, configured all the interactions, and provided zero documentation, or possibly the company discarded the documentation. After some investigation, I discovered that the application was actually scattered among at least 3 different servers. 2 of the servers were AWS, and the company didn't know the username and password of the AWS account. They did have credentials for the 3rd server, but that was simply the host for the front-end interface, and a customer mailing list. All the actual business logic, which the manager I was working with could only explain in the most rudimentary terms, was hosted on those 2 AWS sites. I did find the problem, an expired security certificate, and we got them back up and running, but I did my best to explain that if anything else went wrong, there was an excellent chance that there would be no way to fix it. 2 weeks later, the site went down again. One of the AWS sites wasn't accepting HTTP requests anymore. When I explained that I couldn't access the server to find out what was happening because they didn't have credentials, I was asked if I could just rebuild the application on a new server. I told them that it was possible, but that I'd need someone to explain in detail all the necessary business logic, and that they'd lose their customer database, again, no credentials, and have to start that over from scratch. They said, "Oh, okay," and that was the end of the conversation. I have no idea if they're still in business. Wow, that's as bad as not doing backups. I mean, you have no credentials to get into your servers, nobody knows how anything runs, so when it craps out, it craps out. It's a disposable business. Check out these videos right here. I think you'll like them. Also, if you wouldn't mind, give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already and if you think I've earned your subscription, and click that little bell icon so you don't miss the fat guy with the beard telling you stories. See ya!